So we move to the next speaker, Professor Andrew Brown, and his title is Mapping Progress Towards SDGs Using Artificial Intelligence. Please, you can introduce yourself.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Is there a clicker for the presentation?
Yes, please. You have the clicker.
Thank you very much. So by way of introduction, my name is Andrew Brown. I'm the Director for QUID for Europe, the Middle East and Africa. I've been with QUID for about 3 years now, the first 2 of which were spent largely focused on strategy consulting, and then I've switched to kind of a growth-focused role for the last year or so. Prior to that, I was a negotiator for New Zealand at the United Nations in New York, focused primarily on the Budget and Administration Committee, the Fifth Committee, and the Special Committee for Peacekeeping Operations. So it's very nice to be here today to kind of merge my 2 worlds of the United Nations and artificial intelligence and technology. So I'm going to speak a little bit today about using artificial intelligence to measure the SDGs, and particularly looking at the 17th goal around public-private partnerships for achieving the SDGs. I'm personally of the view that it's one of the most critical goals in order to achieve all of the other goals that we set out back in 2015. So I'm going to spend the first couple of minutes just quickly introducing QUID as a company and the kind of core technology that we have. And then we're going to jump into some analysis that we have done, especially for the UN, on mapping these public-private partnerships for the goals. So QUID as a company has been around for about 9 years now. To date, we've raised $108 million worth of venture capital funding from the likes of Peter Thiel and his Founders Fund, Salesforce Ventures and Atomico over here in Europe. We currently serve over 200 clients across a really wide variety of industries, including government, NGOs, private sector like finance and healthcare, and we are currently spread across 3 offices in San Francisco, New York, and London. The reason that we have gone to quite a lot of effort and expense over the last 9 years in terms of building QUID is because around 80% of the world's data is text-based, and currently there are very few tools available to help us distill that enormous ocean of information and make it meaningful. So really, the best way to think about QUID is like a next-generation search engine that uses artificial intelligence to read, understand, and organize text information so that we as humans don't have to, and so that we can spend our time doing higher-value activities like executing and implementing. So I'm just going to very briefly touch on the type of data you can analyze using QUID. So QUID has 3 datasets built into the platform. It has a news and blogs database of over 2 billion articles. It has a companies database of 2.3 million public and private companies. And it has every global patent filed going back to the 1960s. You can also upload any of your own data, so that could be things like academic research and abstracts. I actually was just thinking while Matt was talking that we could potentially help kind of centralize some of the content that's out there in terms of open learning. But really, the rule of thumb is that anything you can read, QUID can read for you. This is just a quick lens on some of the clients that we work with, more on the kind of private sector side of things. But let's jump into the public-private partnerships for the Sustainable Development Goals. So starting off, we're going to look at the media narratives around partnerships that are focused on gender equality. So what we did is we had QUID sort of search our news database for every article that mentions a partnership and gender equality as a goal. And what we saw is that about 13% of this topic of conversation focuses on gender equality in the workplace, with gender equality in the kind of development space being around 8% of the conversation in total. This timeline view shows how the conversation has developed over time, and overall there is an increase in the discussion about public-private partnerships for gender equality. But what is really apparent from this chart is that individual events and big announcements of partnerships, such as things like Lean In Together, the UN Women Media Partnership for Gender Equality, and a UN Women Partnership with New Pacific addressing gender equality and violence against women. These announcements really drive enormous spikes in the media coverage, which then die off quite quickly afterwards. So it's a very kind of event-driven conversation. I'd just like to skip forward a little bit here to talk about the public-private partnerships themselves. So in this QUID network, we have each node or dot representing one entity, either a public sector entity or a private sector entity, that has a partnership for the Sustainable Development Goals. This is something that comes from the UN's own data. It's all available online. And what we've coloured it by here is effectively whether the entity was a public or a private sector entity. So I was speaking on a panel in Geneva a little while ago that kind of posed the question, how are we tracking in terms of our progress for public-private partnerships for the Sustainable Development Goals? And I was the final speaker to go on that panel, and a lot of my public sector colleagues before me had spoken of the need to reach out to the private sector and to engage the private sector in order to achieve these goals. And it was really interesting to look at the kind of objective data and see that actually the private sector currently outpaces public sector involvement in partnerships for the Sustainable Development Goals, and the split is about 60-40 in favour of the public sector. In terms of the kind of central meeting places where these partnerships are being formed, in QUID we can see which of these individual entities has the kind of broadest range of connections, the broadest range of partnerships. And unsurprisingly, and in my view, properly, a lot of the kind of major UN organizations like UNDP, UNICEF, UNEP are the kind of central meeting places globally for partnerships for the Sustainable Development Goals. And that's a really interesting point. And again, I was speaking on a panel in Geneva recently on this topic, and the discussion kind of turned to real-time measurement of these goals and how, looking at the Sustainable Development Goals, how much do we really need to be aware on a daily basis of how much kind of progress we've made towards these goals. And my view is that, and especially, how much the UN has contributed to these goals, my view is really that the UN is the perfect meeting place for civil society, the private sector and the public sector to all come together in order to meet, discuss, kind of set a trajectory and kind of generally just kind of have everyone in the same room. I think there's a lot of benefit to that. But really when it comes to going out and getting the work done, it is best to decentralize that. And that's what we see through the inclusion of Goal 17 in the SDGs. And I think that we're seeing some positive progress as a result of that. When we look towards, that was the analysis from 2018. When we changed that to 2019, it's a very similar picture. It's this kind of same core entities that are at the center of this conversation. But what we have done is done basically a side-by-side comparison over the last year on a goal-by-goal basis to see, how many partnerships are being formed for this and what the kind of split is in terms of public versus private sector. The really interesting things that we noted were that kind of goals 4, 7, and 15 have all seen a significant increase in private sector participation, even just within the last year. So those goals being quality education, affordable clean energy, and I believe goal 15 is life on land. For my money, this is the kind of singularly most interesting view of the SDGs and our progress towards them, looking at the kind of partnerships for these goals. What this chart shows, the blue colouring on the bar chart that you can see, shows whether or not a partnership for that particular goal is solely focused on that goal, and the grey area shows a partnership for that goal where lots of other goals are kind of mentioned. So to give a kind of real world example, let's say you have let's say Siemens in Germany has formed a partnership with UNEP to focus on getting plastic out of the ocean. That would be a goal. That would be a partnership for Goal 14 purely. But the partnership might also say we're also going to clean up plastic on land. So that would then be kind of Goal 14 and Goal 15. So that would be coloured grey in this chart. And what is the kind of overwhelming takeaway here is that most of the partnerships that are focused on Goal 14, on life below water, are singularly focused on that goal. They don't try to do lots of other things at the same time. They just focus on that one thing. And I think what's really powerful about that, and my kind of hypothesis, is that when we look back in 2030 at the success of the SDGs and which ones were achieved, which ones were close to achieved, which ones were not achieved, I think Goal 14 is going to be the one that we have shown the most progress on, and I think that is because of the singularity of focus. I think in almost anything you do in life, the more you can focus on something, the higher your chances of achieving it, and the less you distribute that focus, the better. So I think it will be really interesting to kind of look back on this in not that long time, I guess, almost 10 years' time, to see how much progress has been made, and to see, if we can learn anything as a international community about how to maybe set the next 15 years worth of goals, and maybe, you know, singularity of focus will be one of the metrics that we use for success. So I will pause there for questions and discussions. I was hoping to show you a lot more kind of live in our software, but unfortunately the IT infrastructure has not allowed for that today, which is always ironic for a artificial intelligence technology company to not have a working HDMI cord. But I would welcome any questions from the floor, and more than happy to discuss anything really.
So please remember, if we all help and do a little bit, it will make a big difference.